Thank you, Jeremy. Thank you for the opportunity to present what we're doing in the NSTIC pilot. I'm a co-founder of Criterion Systems, which is a systems integrator in the federal market space, largely classified environments. We do cloud security as well as a variety of different things in the intelligence community. I also co-founded ID DataWeb, which is designed specifically for this particular purpose to create a managed service platform called an attribute exchange and a credential exchange network. As a matter of background, before we get into it, there are a lot of topics. I've got a compressed amount of time, plus I want to do a demo. About 2.5 years ago, we started working in collaboration with Google under a project called Street Identity, which we developed and the endpoints for attribute exchange. And at that time, a lot of folks were asking, how do you make money with credentials and attributes on the online environment? And so we asked Eric Sachs, how do we do this? And he says, well, take a user, verify their attributes, bind it to a credential, and we believe that a relying party would pay $1 per user per year. We said, oh, that's interesting. He says, then a user would go out and create 9 more accounts. We said, okay, $10 a year, that's pretty good. And he said, we have 100 million users we'd like to start this with. And we said, oh, we know the math on that one. It's really interesting now. So we didn't really quite understand how that worked until we got into implementing. And lo and behold, the real efficiencies come out of developing a network to do that from a variety of perspectives. And so I'm going to walk you through kind of the logic of how the network works, and then we're going to demo the user experience. And then hopefully you'll say, well, that's not anything different than what we do today, and we've accomplished the mission. So the pilots are really done in tandem with a couple of things. This is a user-centric attribute exchange network, and it's done in tandem with some work we're doing at the Open Identity Exchange, in which Peter Graham from Verizon and I co-chair a working group called Attribute Exchange Working Group for developing trust frameworks around a similar model or model. And it's not really a specification, it's more of a guidebook of how to implement trust frameworks around the notion of attribute exchange networks. And what we've done is broken that down to a variety of different subgroups. So we have Kim Little from Lexis, who heads up the business subgroup. On the legal side, we have Tom Smettinghoff, you all may be familiar with. On the technical side, John Bradley from Ping with a variety of really talented technical folks. And then on the privacy side, we have Dale Rickards from Verizon. And on the assessor certification, we have folks including Naomi Lefkowitz, and it's Maisha from Deloitte. So this community effort has actually been feeding us insights into what the market is needed, as well as we've been implementing technology which has given feedback into this specification, if you will. And the goodness out of that is going to be published, we hope, in the June timeframe to allow folks out here to consume that and implement it well. Now what we're going to demonstrate in the pilots is really the ecosystem itself, the actors, identity providers, attribute providers, relying parties, and of course the user interfaces and the data flows. We are actually implementing real contracts, and that's the hard thing, because what we've done is we have a whole host of different contracts with the community of service providers who sell things like attributes and verification and authentication services. And then we have customers who don't want a lot of noise in that, so we've consolidated all that down into one contract structure with flow-down terms with all of those. So we have a full-time legal guy who's working on that, and we're going through iterations on improving that. The second piece is we've had to build privacy, and so effectively we've changed our architecture a couple times, and that's been okay because I think it's enhanced the messaging as well as the perception of the marketplace. In our basic use case scenario is where the user is involved in asserting attributes, giving permission for them to be verified, and then giving permission for those verifications, the claims generated, to be shared with relying parties who then pay for them. They're the customers. So I'm going to walk you through a little bit of that. We have a whole host of different things and the advanced use cases related to different types of protocols. We use OAuth and OpenID in addition to SAML 2.0 and a variety of other federation protocols, in addition to different credential types and different types of stepped-up authentication techniques. Now, the business model is critical. So everybody kept saying how we make money, and it had to be free to users. And we examined the marketplace and talked to some really, really big companies. And I'll talk a little bit about the team. Effectively, we have identity providers, so Google, AOL, Verizon, and Symantec is now an identity provider. LexisNexis, Experian. We're adding others to the team, but Pacific East, which is AT&T and TransUnion data for real-time verification services. And then we have some other technologies which are device ID technologies and biometric technologies from a variety of different really, really great companies like Dayon and other folks we're in conversations with, and then other attribute sources. So we had to align the incentives around all of this community to actually demonstrate an identity ecosystem. And I think we're making some progress in that. That's, I think, and some really interesting lessons learned at the same time. At the same time, this had to be a neutral internet scale platform. It's a cloud service. We're migrating to a FISMA moderate cloud as we speak because we just want to make sure that we have the right security protocols in place. At the same time, we had to promote user trust, and a lot of that has to do with the mechanisms you use for authenticating assertions or verifying users in the process. Let's see here. So our first year use cases are 4 different organizations. I'll talk to you briefly about those. The first is Broadridge. That's a company that provides business process outsourcing communication services for the broker-dealer community for about 100 million investors. And what they have is it's a really, really exciting use case, a platform they've developed called Fluent. And when you go to Fluent, it allows for interoperability between different investment banking entities, all the usual suspects, and they will then digitize, instead of getting proxy statements and doing proxy voting and communications for investors via paper, which we all then take and put in the trash can typically, you will then have an online interface. And so to get that, because of FFEIC regulations, you have to do at least 2-factor authentication. General Electric is the second use case, and that one we got final approval, so I think we're in good shape there. And that is really for various applications. We're trying to refine the use case for corporate partner and consumer account access. That's a federation problem set that's very exciting because it's large scale. And then also next is DHS, and that's being done actually out of MIT Lincoln Labs. It's the First USA portal for first responders. If all of us remember Sandy from last year, that was a disaster where the folks that were trying to repair utility problems couldn't get through to the disaster areas because they couldn't verify who they were. And the last use case is eBay for seller registration, and that's fairly evident. Our framework for services, and I'm going to go very quickly on this, and is really, this is the typical diagram you'll see in the NSTIC program. A lot of the folks that worked with us in the beginning actually helped write NSTIC, and so it's not a surprise that a lot of what we're doing is at the scale that we're trying to do it at. So we have, as you can imagine, relying parties, and those are the folks who are our customers, identity providers who authenticate users, attribute providers, as I mentioned, are a host of those that are really excited about what we're doing. And then with or without a trust framework provider, we believe that trust frameworks actually bring a really, really good opportunity for communities of interest to rally around specific projects they're trying to do and actually have shared liability that's covered under those frameworks. The Attribute Exchange Network sits in the middle. It's a transaction hub. It's also a contractual hub. So to improve efficiencies associated with rolling this out to a whole spectrum of relying parties, what we've done is a lot of hard work, and of course we have assessors and auditors. So the way the user, I don't want to minimize the user. So the way this works is that we set up a marketplace, and in order to actually pay people money and actually gather money from customers, we have registration flows which are done online. So identity providers will come into the interface and they'll register a service by credential type, a protocol that they're willing to support, the corresponding level of assurance, and whether they're certified under some trust framework regime. And that trust framework regime, there are a lot of them out there under FICAM, OIX, Kantara, and others that are proprietary. I know that the folks at TSCP are actively engaged. That's the supply chain that Keith Ward, it's for Lockheed, Northrop, Boeing, and the industrial base, about 300,000 companies. And so each one of those may create their own trust framework or trust marks associated with their community to make sure you adhere to their standards. Similarly, attribute providers come in, they register, and they'll say, I have a service that We'll verify name, email address, telephone, date of birth, attributes associated with our PIIs users, and also with corporate verification in case you are, registering as a seller on eBay, for example. You want to do some mapping to that use case. In some cases, we have physical devices, biometrics, device IDs, which we'll talk about, and one of our partners is Wave Systems that will actually verify TPM chips as well as their verification for mobile devices. They'll post their pricing and their certification. This particular, as Jeremy was saying, there's no certification regime for attribute verification or attribute providers in the context of their identity proofing certifications, but then it's kind of adjacent, but not quite there. Then on the other side, the customers are now prepared to come to market. They will register their service. They will register their corporation because we're going to build them, but also each service. Now, this is a very important point. From a policy enforcement, policy control point, each service within, let's say, General Electric, not to overuse that name, they have hundreds and maybe more services that they expose in their community. And each one has different requirements for credential types. They may actually require some verification of attributes for onboarding that's different from dealing with partners, for example, onboarding employees. At the same time, they will come in, they'll say, I need these claims refreshed on a periodic basis. So instead of refreshing it every time you log in, they may say, I want to verify attributes once a year, it's good enough for me. We manage all that dynamically in the exchange. And they'll say, I want this credential type to be used for this particular service. I want to use a PIV card, or I want to use an OpenID credential. And they'll also say the level of assurance associated with that process. All that we manage dynamically. And then also, they will have a certification requirement. Now, that's where you impose trust frameworks. They're the customer. They say, I want everybody to be FICAM certified, or I want them to be certified under some regime for their community of interest. And then everybody who says, I want to make money. There's 100 million identities that can be verified on a periodic basis. This is interesting. I'll go and get, comply with that certification requirement. So a couple other nuances here. In attribute-based control environments, you have authoritative attributes associated with LDAP directories or some source in an enterprise, and we manage those by having those register as attribute sources. They can control the community of interest that can actually manage or get access to those, and that's dealt with in the policy layer. Account federation is done with three mechanisms on the exchange. One, we don't store the attributes that a user would assert in our exchange. I'll get to that in a second. The first thing, though, is credential federation. So binding attributes to a credential is interesting, but if you want to minimize the number of credentials that you're distributing in your community, the way you do that is by binding them with verified attributes, verified through some source and mechanisms, whatever is required for your service. And so we enable credential federation using verified attributes to bind to an existing account or to create a new account. In the case of the early days of street identity, it was you'd go in, you'd log in with, you'd click to log in with Google using it, and you'd get an OpenID credential because you have a Gmail account, you authenticate, and lo and behold, we'd verify attributes, and suddenly you could just create that account. And then you can go and use that same verified attributes and credentials to create 9 more accounts. That's the reuse of the really interesting reuse of just basically creating new accounts. And then when you log in, it's just a single click. And you go through a lot of token exchange in the back end. That's level assurance 1, not really appropriate for government applications. Personal data services, the way we manage that is effectively at the end of our flow, we strip out the attributes the user has asserted, and we then encrypt them into a data blob, and we randomize that into a cloud store. As long as we can grab it again for when you want to create that second account, then basically you can do that. If you lose that data blob, or if you store it on a TPM chip in a device or a hardware token somewhere, then we just have you reassert your attributes. It creates a new one, and then we can position it someplace else. Now that's an important feature because in Europe, a lot of the privacy standards require that you store the user attributes somewhere local in the country of residence. So this is easily achieved with this particular mechanism. It was also really great because we don't create a big central data store, so the attack surface is also very difficult the way we've implemented it, and it makes it really trivial or non-interesting for hackers, we think. User-managed admin console is a free feature. We've actually now been getting a really good feedback from the RPs that want to use this for branding purposes. It's a user-centric portal that is federated out to each site. I'll show it to you. So once you've gone through and got verified attribute claims, it allows you to manage personally where your attributes have been distributed to each account. And then you can manage whether you want to revoke their access or change the attributes that are used. I don't know how many of you actually have created a lot of accounts over the last year, but I can't remember where I have my stuff anymore and which passwords I use. So it's kind of like a free benefit, and from a privacy perspective, only the user can access in a set of context-aware tokens, and we have some security models such as picture password that one of the partners on the exchange, KG, is actually real excited about working with them just to create another layer if folks wanted to have. And Bob Thibodeau is the founder of that company. So we have a Trust Elevation roadmap. Now, Trust Elevation has a lot of interesting nuances. I'll talk a little bit about what we're doing. Device ID attributes. We have mobile device ID attributes that, two different forms. You have a variety of technologies that enterprises like to have users in their environment download so they can control what they have. But there's another set of emerging technologies that actually will, when the user permission, go out the network layer and pull the device ID and SIM card and be able to basically map in that user's clicking a button to authenticate with that device. So it's a step-up auth in parallel, no friction, which is a really good thing, and very inexpensive, so cost-effective. The other is TPM chips, which is on your laptops or on your computers that have them activated. Windows 8, a lot of the enterprise devices will be activated, and then there's Wave Systems. One of our partners has actually got a great technology for that. And then there are cloud-based or biometric cloud-based services for voice, retinal photo, and fingerprint. And there's some really interesting new ones coming out. So, Dayon you'll hear all about them. It's a great company for that. But there's some really interesting ones with, when you're typing in, it'll do some pattern matching and things like that, or just tapping a device in random pattern. It happens to be a biometric that I didn't know about. And then fine-grained policy authorization services. This is for attribute-based access control. In a lot of use cases that this market alone is much bigger and dwarfs everything else that we're doing because it is going to compete with Federal Express and other large organizations where you send packages everywhere, but you do it because the way it's done today. So in a Trustmark framework, and this is something we've been talking about in the standards community, you have a host of different options. So we will, in the basic flow, do a verification of user attributes and then bind that with an SMS out of band to a phone, to a device, which then goes and also checks the information from your phone records just to keep that tight. You can step that up with a variety of technologies, biometric down to PKI credentials. The price typically goes up or in this direction and that direction, but you have a portfolio of options that weren't really envisioned 10 years ago. And I think there's a lot of room in this community in particular to consider Trustmarks just around security packaging. Which ones? This is all about risk mitigation requirements for that specific service that you're trying to expose to online users. Privacy by design was built into this technology. So there are at least four different things we've done. One, legal agreements. So that's extremely important. And the contracts actually have flow-down terms from our partners, and Lexis and Experian and folks like that were patient enough for us to go through the process of learning how to do that properly, and we're still learning as we go. Interestingly enough, on that topic, because the user is involved in the process of asserting data and giving permission, there are carve-outs in some of these regulations. Fair Credit Reporting Act, Gramm-Leach-Bliley, HIPAA even, and some of these other acts. Because you're actively engaged in giving permission for the process, there's some interesting, potential morphing in the legal constructs around this particular process. Second, we act as a proxy. As I mentioned, basically, I didn't mention, when you log in, you're redirecting through the AXN, which acts as a proxy for the RP. So the identity providers really can't track where you came from. They think you came from us, but in reality, you came from a whole host of different RP services, which is, again, privacy enhancing. The data management scheme I described doesn't centralize data, so it removes the attack surface. We don't even have access to your PII. We track users by credential. That's it. And so if you asked us, well, where's my information? You can't even get to the data once it's verified, except for if you come to the relying party site through authenticating yourself through the identity provider, and then you can access that federated button to show your console, which I'll show you. The other thing is data minimization, which basically was by design, and we kind of lucked into this one, I think, because relying parties specify what data they want. Facebook is one of the identity providers we're adding to the exchange, and we feel very comfortable with that, surprisingly enough. Although it was a bit of a struggle and discussion, I think, in the beginning. The way we do that is Facebook offers a lot of attributes through their OAuth flow. The scopes that they offer are everything you can imagine down to the friends that you have on Facebook. But all we do is basically when we interface with our API, we mask out or we drop out or we put null values effectively in the scopes that we don't want to capture. And we rewrite in RAM so we can't even get to it even if we did. So once we pull the scopes down, we then go through a verification flow where the user asserts them and we're re-verifying the attributes anyway. So that actually happens with the attribute providers too. In the case of attribute providers, the APIs are very robust and have a lot of information. What we're really trying to do is bind a user to a session online. Name, email address, telephone number, whatever's required. There's been some studies, and Kim was kind enough to share in the standards group, some studies that said you only need a handful of attributes to really verify a user and bind them. Then what you do to layer cake that in terms of the techniques is really where you can really begin to bind the user to that session. So FIPS, by design, is in our technology. All right, so I'm going to try something that I never recommend people do. I'm going to give you a live demo of the user experience. Okay, so I'm going to browse to a mock relying party called Bank Online. Now, when Bank Online register on the exchange, they specify the attributes they want verified. And I can log in with Google and AOL and Verizon and Facebook, but I don't have any accounts except for Google right now, so I'm going to do that. We actually render this as a paste-on, unless the relying party wants to develop theirs. In the provisioning process, at the end of the day, they sign a contract and we vet them, because we have to do that for the attribute providers. We have to actually go through and do site visits in some cases, but those are for non-public companies. And then basically, if I want to log in, I just click on Gmail. I'm going to create a new account. I'm going to show you 3 flows. The hardest one is to create a new account. This is OAuth. I'm sorry. I'm logged into Google. I'm going to log out. This is what happens first. Traditional Google login. This is Google IDP at the back end. Identity provider. I'm sorry if I'm using acronyms. So I'm going to go ahead and sign in with Google. Max Connect is a brand we had to create. We're not trying to create a brand. We're actually trying to be plumbing and stay below that. But the first thing that happens one time with every identity provider using OAuth, not with SAML, but with OAuth, is you have to give permission and allow access, which is a grant. And this is what I was talking about before, where we minimize what actually comes across to us. So I grant approval for Google to share whatever they have at Google. And then we go out and say, oh, the relying party configuration said I wanted these attributes to be verified. And behind me is, you can see, Bank Online, right there. So this page gets dynamically created, and it's based on the attributes that are required to be asserted. And you're not allowed to look at this, but this is my real stuff otherwise. So this is very similar, at least in my experience, to what I do when I create an account anywhere. In this case, this is a level 1 assurance. And that's my cell phone. This is live. 2.9. This is a production, well, this is my sandbox. So now it's going and taking those attributes. I just gave it permission by clicking. And it's going up to LexisNexis, I believe, in this case. And it's generating claims, and it's done. It just verified the information I asserted. Now, and I just got a ping on my phone. And that said, well, I'm going to cheat. 1418. Now, let me just, before I complete this flow, what we did was user asserted my data, user gave permission, I went up to LexisNexis, generated some claims. Now the claims are combinations of attributes. You can't just verify name, for example. It has to be name with address or some combination. And that's part of the configuration when a relying party registers. So this is an out-of-band that just verified, again, it's going up. Now it's also verifying my cell phone that I did that, and it went against the billing record, coincidentally. Done. Okay, now I say I'm done. What happened at the end, we bundle up the authentication assertion that I got from Google, the attribute verification claims, and the attributes themselves, and we encrypt those. We notify the relying party. They come and grab them with a key that when they register the shared secret and key, they open those up, and with SCIM, they consume those to authorize the service. So, in duties and responsibilities, the identity provider authenticated the user. The relying party authorized the service. We're a transaction mechanism and a contractual hub. So I talked to you about the Manage Admin Console. This is the federation button. Not all relying parties will want to use it, but when I click on that button, I went out and grabbed that PDS token I talked about. It was in the data store in the cloud. Unlocked it. It has to have a session key and another key, a contractual key, which is kind of our secret sauce. Exposes this and says, hey, you logged in with Google, and this is brought to you by Bank Online. So this is a free service, and as a user, I now can manage the fact that I've got attributes that have been shared, and I can revoke access. This is user in control of my stuff. Now, I'm going to go and show you my second flow, and I'm almost done. I'm going to go to a brokerage site. I've created a set of verified attributes with a specific credential, and I'm going to go to another one and say, I want to create a second account. This is where I'm creating 9 more accounts really quickly. Now, I'm logged into Google, so this will go fast. I apologize. But behind the scenes, I click on this and it says, oh, okay, I see you're logged in now. It goes to the IDP, brings up the attributes I've already got verified and says, do you want to use these or do you want to search some new ones? So I want to use these. Rebundle them up, ship them up to, in this case, Pacific East, which was AT&T and TransUnion data, I believe. They verified them and said, good enough, authorized service. That's pretty painless for creating a second account. Now I go to my Manage Admin Console. It's been federated out. It's going to get that PDS store, bringing it back, unlocking this, and exposing it to us in a secure browser. There. So now I can manage both. There's some other things that we're adding to this, which is the ability to link credentials and accounts. It'll be done in this format. Also, preferences that relying parties want exposed to users. So it's like CRM controlled by users about what I want to interact, how I want to interact with that relying party. So, okay, I showed you 2. I want to show you the last use case. I want to go back to just get out of the browser. It's real simple. I'll be out of. Back on, I want to go back, and it's a day later. Logged into Google. I want to log into Bank Online. Comes back up. Log in with my Gmail account. There's a Furious token exchange in the back end. And using OAuth, and I'm in. Single sign-on on the web. Okay, so that's the demo. I think I'm done with that. I can go to wrap up pretty quickly. How am I doing on time? Over? Oh, I'm sorry. Okay, schedule. We have a 5-step operation process. The last, ideally, is to go into production. We're ready on all these, but I'll talk about the lessons learned. Getting contracts in place is interesting because we're doing federation, and the security guys are learning, as the legal counsel as well. But we're really excited. Things are moving well as can be, and I think as we go through this process, we're crossing the chasm, and hopefully that'll help accelerate the process. So, lessons learned. RPs are the customer. They drive policy. They drive requirements. We have some emerging trust frameworks. I mentioned that TSCP is working on the supply chain. Keith Ward's in the back if you have any questions about that. And those are high assurance credentials across 300,000 companies to reduce redundancy and also make their operations more efficient. Broadridge is also in the process of considering whether to do a trust framework, and we think they're very excited because Fluent is a federation app at its core. There are some changes I just mentioned, that policy changes that have to go through consideration. You need a business leader to drive that through the process. IDP business practices do not always conform to FIPS. I think we've got that one addressed pretty well, or at least we think we have it. We went through a rigorous privacy evaluation methodology. Good learning out of that. We learned that privacy is a core messaging strategy for us to market the Attribute Exchange Network, not only to our partners, but to communities of interest. It's a big differentiator for companies to say to their customers, we're going to enhance your privacy by interacting with us and increase trust. Last but not least, I show you the matrix of risk mitigation options. We believe that there's a lot of work to be done here, and I think there's some real interesting opportunities for the community to coalesce around options, and there's some great technologies that have matured in the marketplace, I think, that are really worth spending some time with. Thank you very much.